Well, good evening, everybody. You came in just after we started this discussion, but welcome to, it's not the actual book launch because Adrian's done a thing or two, but it is publication day.
It is publication day today.
Right.
All right.
Yay!
Yes.
For the Island with this beautiful cover, and we are just delighted to have Adrian back. We were talking in the back room about our first meeting with Adrian when he was in Denver. Patrick, that was probably you.
Yeah, it was. Was it for Dead I Well May Be? Or
It might have been. It might have been my first novel, which was 2004. So 18 years ago.
Was that Scribner?
Yeah, it was Scribner, yes.
That's what I thought. Right. In any case, it's really been a pleasure to spend time with Adrian. And The Island is based upon his 10-year, what do I want to call it?
Sojourn, exile.
Not exile, that's too harsh.
Okay, sojourn.
In Australia.
Yes.
Actually, to Melbourne, a city to which I have been because I have family there, and a city that I really like.
Yeah.
Although I read something the other day that said that Sydney was like, the place to be in Australia. It has the most beneficent climate.
Yeah.
And, it's too hot and sticky going north towards Brisbane and up into Queensland, and Perth is so far away.
Yeah.
And Melbourne can be kind of cold.
I got into all of that and the whole Sydney-Melbourne rivalry.
Yeah.
And I'm a Melburnian all the way through. Sydney is a very showy city. It displays its charms in a very obvious manner, whereas Melbourne its charms are a lot more subtle. And I like that better. So I'm a Melburnian.
I am too. I can still remember the Botanical Garden, which is like the best begonias ever. But it's a port city. There's a lot of things.
Yeah, it's great.
Excuse me, that Melbourne has going for it. And Sydney reminds me actually of Shanghai.
Yeah. I can see that.
So we bring that up because we are going to be somewhere near Melbourne.
Yeah, I mean, so the genesis of this book was the last book. The last book I wrote was called The Chain. And I finished the tour of that. And my last ever event was in March of 2020, and I was at the Crime Festival in Norway. And while I was in the Crime Festival in Norway, my wife called me up and said, Adrian, they're closing the New York City public schools. And I said, why? And she said, don't you read the news? There's this thing called COVID-19, and I don't really read the news, so it can cause problems like that, and we were a bit out of the loop. And I said, they're closing the schools, and she said, yeah, you got to get back. They're talking about closing the borders and stuff like that. And so I did my last day at the Crime Festival, and then left that night. And then when I arrived at JFK, all these people were saying, where have you come from? They weren't letting people in from the Far East, but I was full carry. I was coming in from Northern Europe, and literally 3 days after that, they closed the New York City public schools, and New York went into lockdown. And it was a pretty odd situation because both my girls were home with us, and my wife, her school was obviously canceled. So from all of us going out all the time, now we were inside this tiny little apartment for months at a time, and it was just a nightmare. And the Zoom schools didn't work that well.
This book is starting to make a lot of sense now.
Yes.
You're talking about it.
Zoom school didn't work. The kids would be on Zoom school all day, breaking down. The internet would go out. They were so sad and depressed. And then the teachers were giving them tons of homework, I guess, to make up for. So they were all, about 10, at 10 o'clock at night, they would be done, and I would be done, like helping them with the computers and stuff like that. And I was just exhausted, and I didn't want to write anything. And I knew I had to write a follow-up to The Chain, because it said in the contract that I had to write a follow-up to The Chain.
Compelling reason.
Yes, it was a very compelling reason. And when your editor calls you up and says, how's the book coming along? Well, you can lie to your editor. And you can just go, it's going great. It's going great. I've got tons of ideas. I'm going in lots of different directions. It's fantastic. None of that was true. I had no ideas, and it was going in no directions at all.
So your training-ready fiction came right into play, right?
You can lie to your editor, but you can't lie to your agent. And so when my agent would call me up, and I said, oh, mate, I'm in big trouble. I got nothing, and I'm just, here with the kids all day long, and I'm so depressed, and It feels like the world is, you know, a really dark place, and I just got nothing. And you know, and he didn't hassle me. He didn't force me to write something. He said, just take your time; it'll come. And then we get to talking about movies or TV or whatever. What you know, he was working on at the moment. So this went on for months and months and months, and we would just have longer and longer conversations about movies. And I love 1970s movies. I'm a big 70s movie nut. And, you know, I could probably, there's a British show called Mastermind where you have a specialist subject. And if I was on Mastermind in the UK, my specialist subject would be 1970s movies, and I would kill. And, or maybe 1970s music. I also would do quite well there too. But, so I just love, and we were talking a lot about 70s movies, and then we got to have this long conversation, me and my agent Shane, about Deliverance. And I'd seen Deliverance 2 or 3 times, and I'd read the book a couple of times, and I'm a big fan of James Dickey's writing, his poetry and his prose, because his poetry is extraordinary, but his prose is also, it's really terse and beautiful in its own way. And I think he was a real master, James Dickey. And the movie is its own thing, and it goes, John Berman's the director, if you remember, and it goes in a slightly different direction, but it's also fantastic. So we were talking about the movie one time, and I said to him, you know, it's funny, Shane, I had my own kind of Deliverance moment a couple of years ago when we were in Australia. And he goes, what was that? And I said, well, we decided to go for a drive. We used to do these long drives outside Melbourne. And I love getting out of the city, because if you get an hour north out of Melbourne, you're into the landscape where they filmed Mad Max, which is a movie I just loved. I love Mad Max. And then if you go about another 6 or 7 hours further north, you get into the landscape of Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, which is even crazier. It's just this spectral, weird desert landscape with dinosaur cars, and just it's really fantastic. And just anywhere out of Melbourne, any direction, you get into interesting countryside. So one place we'd never really explored was south. Right. And we'd gone down to see the penguins. We were just talking about that. But there's another island off the coast of Australia that no one really goes to. No one really goes to it for a reason, because there's really nothing there. But one time we decided to explore, and we went down there, and it was January. It was extremely hot, I remember. It was about 42 degrees Celsius, so like mild for Phoenix.
Well, that's going too far.
But, you know, 115 or something like that. Very, very hot. And a baked, ozone-depleted Australian heat, you know, because they've no ozone layer there. So it's really, really intense heat. And we went down to this island, and we got this ferry over to this place. And it was quite odd. The whole situation was quite strange. And when we got the ferry over, the first thing I saw was 2 guys walking around with double-barrel shotguns broken up over their shoulders. They're walking around with shotguns. And you never see that in Australia, because they have very strict gun control. So you never see long guns, ever. Occasionally you see cops with pistols on their hips, but you never see long guns, ever. And so to see 2 guys with shotguns was very odd. And then we would hear gunfire, and they were extirpating the rabbit population on the island. They were, you know, out shooting rabbits. But that was just the first thing to see, the guys with the shotguns, and then to hear the gunfire, odd. And then we were driving around this island, and it was this bleak, kind of barren, extremely hot island with nothing much on it. And we stopped at this farm for something to eat. And at the farm we learned, they said, oh yeah, and they knew all about us, because we talked to the guy in the ferry. And then he had, by walkie-talkie, had told everybody in the farm, you know, that we were coming. So everybody in the island knew who we were and where we'd come from. And we found out that they were one large extended family that lived on this island. And I thought, well, that's odd. You know, that when we arrived, they said, oh yeah, you're the guys from Melbourne. You came down today. And they knew all about us. I thought, okay, that's extremely strange. And then at the farm, the vibe was again a little bit sinister. And then I made a terrible joke. I cracked a joke that soured the mood. I don't know if you remember in Deliverance, but they crack a bad joke, you know, and it sours the mood. And I foolishly did the same thing. And we were at this farm. There was an enormous barn behind us. And I, for whatever reason, said, oh, is that where you keep the Wicker Man? And that did not go down well, because they didn't want some condescending guy from the city to come and think that they were all these rubes who would kill you as soon as look at you. But it did look as if they would kill us as soon as they would look at us. So my wife was getting really uncomfortable here, and the vibe was weird, and there was no phone service, and the kids were with us, and they were just sort of oblivious to it all. They were quite young or younger. And we decided, I looked at my watch, it was 3:10. And the guy in the ferry had been really specific with us. He said, the last ferry goes at 3:30, and if you miss it, that's it. There's no, you're not getting across tonight. And I looked at my watch, it was 3:10. I thought, oh my God, the ferry. And so I bundled the kids into the car, and I got in the car and started driving really fast. And on either side of the road, there was this long grass called spinifex, this really tall, thin, bristly Australian grass. And I'm bombing it down this road, the ferry. And in front of me, this woman comes out on a bicycle, 42 degrees Celsius. You shouldn't be riding your bike in that heat. She comes out on a bicycle, just right out of the spinifex, and she's got a hearing aid on. And she turns onto the road, and I honk the horn and slam on the brakes. And obviously the hearing aid's not working, or the battery's dying or something. She doesn't hear me at all. And so she's here, and I'm here, and the car brakes like here, and then she just keeps riding around down the road, completely oblivious that we were ever there. And I'm shaking. I'm literally shaking with my hands on the steering wheel, and I'm just going, my God, we really almost
killed this all.
We almost hit this lady. And I turned to break the tension, I turned to my wife and I said to her, if we'd hit her, we wouldn't have got off this island alive. And then my wife very seriously said to me, I don't think we would have. And so I was telling this story to my agent, and I said, and my wife said that she didn't think we would have. And then Shane, my agent, said to me, you did hit her. That's the next book. and I thought about it for about 15 seconds, and I thought, yep, we hit her, and that's the book. And
Did you make the ferry?
We did make the ferry. In the book, well, I'll leave you to read what happens in the book. But and then I thought, yeah, exactly, that's the whole book. And in the book, in the island, terrible things happen throughout the book. Terrible things happen, but they're all within the logical parameters of that initial setup. Like, they're all within the universe of that world. And the decisions they make and the bad things that happen, they're all completely within the logic of that initial premise. That they're driving on the road and there's an accident. And then everything that happens after that, hopefully, is entirely logical.
But you send them to the island with a certain amount of baggage. In particular,
Oh, yeah.
in particular, the children.
yeah.
Yes, this is a second marriage.
I knew that I couldn't, it couldn't be me driving the car because I'm just way too boring. And so I decided that the guy driving the car had to be a little bit more interesting. And then I decided that the other passengers had to be everybody had to have an edge to them or have something more interesting. And I also wanted them all to kind of arc throughout the story and change and grow, particularly my heroine in the book, Heather. I really wanted her to grow as the story went on and increase in confidence. And, it's funny, I didn't set out to write a sequel to The Chain. I never would write a sequel to The Chain. But in a funny way, it's a thematic sequel because The Chain is the story of a woman who is a mother and her child gets kidnapped, and she doesn't realize what inner resources she has to get her child back to her. And similarly in The Island, it's about a woman who doesn't want to be a mother in the first place, and she's responsible for these kids, and also she's completely underestimated by everyone, and suddenly realizes what inner strength and resources she have. So when I finished the book, I thought, wow, this isn't a sequel to The Chain, but it is kind of a thematic sequel.
So in the lingo of the day, basically, she gains agency.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Which is, I'm trying to learn the lingo of the day so that I'm not hopelessly old-fashioned. But there's a lot of current crime literature about women being empowered. Well, not just crime literature in point of fact.
Yeah.
About women being empowered either through their own actions or through other people's
It's
actions.
also an old trope. I mean,
Sure.
I so much preferred Miss Marple to Poirot, and like Poirot, people would never spill their secrets in front of Poirot. He always had to be like listening at a door, or he would the door of the cabin would be open, and be walking past, and he would hear them. And it was all kind of a little bit preposterous how he would gather his information. Whereas Miss Marple was so much better because people just ignored her, and they considered her completely irrelevant. So Miss Marple's there in the room, and they're spilling their secrets right in front of her, and they know she's there. But to them, she's absolutely nothing. She's this older English spinster, not even worth considering or thinking about at all. So I love that, because what they didn't realize was she had a steel trap mind and was smarter than everybody. Everybody in the book was not half as clever as Miss Marple. And they would never have dared said the things that they had said if they'd known that there was this great engine over here that was outthinking them all. And that's another reason why I like Columbo as well, because in Columbo, everybody underestimates him. Always. And that's what's so delicious about that show. All these great 70s character actors, and sometimes stars as well, they're all in the show, and in their universe, they're the star. And there's this shuffling side character comes on in a dirty raincoat, apologizing, dripping cigar ash everywhere, and asking the wrong questions and making faux pas and everything. And they utterly dismiss him, but what they don't realize is that he's a brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so I love books where you get a character who's a peripheral side character who's not that important and doesn't maybe even believe in themselves. And then as the book goes on, they start believing in themselves. And then everyone else, at some point in the hinge point of the story, goes, "Oh my God."
That was like the Kaiser Soze.
Yes, yes.
Unusual Suspects.
Yes, absolutely. In Usual Suspects, Kevin Spacey's character, he's the least formidable of the six guys they put in the lineup. He's the one that fills out the lineup. But then as the story goes on, you, the viewer, and I think some of the characters figure it out as well.
Yeah.
I think does Gabriel Byrne figure it out well, some of the characters, certainly the Joe Montoya, some of the characters figure it out by the end, and you, the viewer, certainly figure it out at the end. Oh my God, all this time, it's this person that we should have been more careful of, or we didn't watch for.
Yeah, but let me disagree with you about Miss Marple in one sense. Used to be, and still is, but more so then, a sort of cloak of invisibility that would drop over middle-aged and aging women. But Miss Marple never had a loss of confidence in her. She always
she always did
how good she was. But it was that kind of invisibility.
They underestimated her,
and that's different than the woman you're writing about, because she doesn't have confidence in herself.
She's believed the hype and believed the fact that she's a loser, not going anywhere, can't do anything. But Columbo and Miss Marple, they know.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Columbo,
and it's an asset for them in their work that they are, in fact, discounted and kind of invisible.
And the thing is that Columbo does it in such a way is that he plays up the mistakes and the faux pas on purpose.
He wants you to underestimate
He wants you to underestimate him.
Doesn't he solve a case with an ice? It was like somebody died by a pool, and it was like an ice dagger or something of the sort. Why do I remember about Columbo? Because by the time everybody got there, the ice had melted, but only Columbo noticed there was an unexplained puddle of water along the side of the pool. Seriously, that's the thing I remember most.
There is that one. There's another one where someone drowns, and I think Columbo notices that they supposedly drown in the ocean, but they don't drown with seawater in their lungs.
Yeah, well, that should come out at the autopsy.
Yeah.
That's not even hard.
Right, and then
Yeah.
and they just go, well, and then he just builds all the pieces. Well, how come this? How come this? How come
Right.
this? And eventually it's a house of cards.
It is.
They're-
So, Patrick, let's go back to your comment about now you can understand this book better, having listened to Adrian cloistered with his children.
Yeah.
So, take it away, because you're
Okay.
absolutely right.
Well, I thought a lot of the magical scenes in the book for me was just the dialogue, with the kids and Heather, her trying to negotiate that really weird situation she's in.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about, they're both O names, Owen and Olivia.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you say that they've both gone their own little journeys, and they certainly do.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that when I was thinking about the book, I thought, well, there's the story of the accident and then the aftermath. But what you need is interesting characters in this car. You've got to have 4 really distinct personalities in the car. And then I thought, well, what if it's 4 personalities and there's like trust issues between all 4 of them? And just issues between all 4 of them. And I really love that idea that it's kind of easy if it's a united front against Group X against Group Y. But what if Group X has a lot of its own problems? Yeah. And there's a great bit in, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Any Given Sunday. Did you ever see that movie? And there's a great scene where Al Pacino, it's a football movie, and Al Pacino, and everyone's broken throughout the whole movie, and there's a fantastic scene. Well, Pacino is great in so many different decades. And this is in the 90s, I think, or early 2000s. And Pacino gets all the characters in the room, and he says, look, it's like this. We have to heal right now in the next 5 minutes, or when we go out there, we're going to get killed. So we have to heal now. And he gives this great speech about healing, and they all have to heal. And they have to fix themselves first before they can fix the situation. And I like that idea for this book. The characters have to fix themselves. They have to fix what the dynamic is that's gone wrong before they can fix the bigger situation.
There's kind of a riff, too, about modern parenthood.
Yeah.
I mean, the father, Tom? Sorry, I'm blanking on names. Doctor, kind of elements of sort of entitled.
Yeah.
Well,
I wanted him to be there's a bit where he's I can't remember who says it, but
both kids on meds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And someone says to him, maybe he says it or someone else says it. He's like he looks like Ted Hughes. And I really like that idea that he's kind of this suave but slightly dodgy Ted Hughes type figure.
Dodgy's such a great word.
Yeah, and he's got this sort of Ted Hughes type comb over, and or not comb over, like what do you call it, like a crow's wing, like drifting across his forehead in this debonair Mr. Darcy kind of way, and or that's how.
Can't be Dodgy and Mr. Darcy. Come on.
Well, that's true. Well, he sees himself as Mr. Darcy, but in fact, he's more like Mr. Wickham.
Okay.
That's a great title, though, for an Austen pastiche. Dodgy Mr. Darcy.
Dodgy Mr. Darcy. In fact, I saw a movie, not to go off topic, but I saw a movie
Why not?
the other night with 2 Mr. Darcys in it called Operation Mincemeat. Have you seen that? It's playing on Netflix right now.
No.
And it's a World War II drama. It's a bit stodgy and plotting, but it's got 2 Mr. Darcys. It's got Colin Firth, and it's got the guy from the 2005 Jane Austen adaptation.
Oh, the one with Keira Knightley?
Yeah, the one with Keira Knightley, and he's also in Succession.
Right.
What's his name?
Yeah.
McFadden. So it's got
he's great.
So it's got 2 Mr. Darcys, and they're both. Oh, this is a spoiler. Don't listen if you're about to watch this movie. They're both after the same girl, and neither Mr. Darcy gets the girl. And you just go, really? And so the girl, she's being pursued by 2 Mr. Darcys, and then neither of them end up with the girl. And I just go, well, that is odd.
So have you missed the Murder of Mr. Wickham? It's a book event we did on May 2nd.
Oh, really?
a book by Claudia Gray in which she moves it all up to 1820, and all of the Austen characters show up at a house party.
Oh, wow.
Hosted, I'm trying to remember Emma and Mr. Knightley. They're hosting the party.
Sure, up at their big manor
Right.
in Derbyshire.
Right, and so it's basically a country house murder. But Mr. Wickham, who's richly deserved to be murdered all the time we've known him,
Right.
is.
Well, I didn't read that one, but I did read one called Longbourn.
Yeah.
Did you read
Yes, I did, which is very different.
Which I loved.
I did too. I thought it was great.
It's Pride and Prejudice told from the POV of the servants. So all the events of Pride and Prejudice happen, but we're seeing it through the eyes of the nameless servants.
Waiting for Rosencrantz and Gilbert.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's
It
exactly
is.
that
But
take.
there's also one in which Mary, the sister that's so nerdy and everybody, there is a book told from Mary's perspective, and she actually gains agency,
Right.
and creates a kind of life for herself. And it was really quite decent. Of course, I can't remember the title. Do you remember it? No. Patrick normally is lurking back there with his phone, and when I blank out on stuff, he uses the chat function.
The chat. But I'll
And
save
it
you.
pops up in front of me.
Mary's underrated. I always like Mary.
But I'll try to find that one for you and
Yeah.
send it to you, because I really liked it.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Of
Yeah,
course
yeah.
you can.
Till the end?
Certainly.
I got this today. The Island.
Yes.
Also was listening to it on Audible
Oh, sure.
after work because it downloaded at work. So I haven't read it yet. But on the chain, the circumstances, that sounds like you put these characters in and then you put them in the chain, which is a parent. Which, as a father.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really troubling, right?
Yeah.
How concerned with your with like morality, right? Because possible decisions.
Yeah. That was the.
Does morality matter?
Yeah, Patrick, we were talking a little bit about this beforehand, and to me, that was the grist for the mill for this book, and for the chain as well. Morality was the big engine of the story, and without the moral decisions, they make some very questionable decisions in the island, and Rachel and the chain make some very questionable decisions, and what you as a reader have to think of is. Would I have done that the way they did it? And if not, why not? And I read reviews, particularly of the chain, where they say she's a terrible person and we shouldn't be rooting for her. And I understand that.
She might be.
Yeah, she might be a terrible person and we shouldn't be rooting for her. And right early in the island, they make some decisions, and we don't know if they're the right decisions that they make. And I have a little bit of dialogue between them, deciding whether this is the right decision. And I like that when characters they make these questionable moral choices, and they actually might be the wrong choices.
We got to be careful not to spoil anything here, though.
Yes. Yeah, got to be careful not to spoil. But
growing up in Northern Ireland influenced you in this way, do you think? Because there's some really terrible moral choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most of the adults I grew up with, or a lot of the adults grew up, made some really, really bad decisions. They joined paramilitaries, and they did terrible things. And for them, it was always, well, in 20 years, you'll all look back and it'll be justified. And now 30, 40 years have gone past, and I don't think those decisions have been justified in any way. So I think that it's a poisoned, toxic moral environment, and that can be fun to explore, and certainly it's interesting to explore, because you don't really want a hero. Or I'm not as interested in heroes where they're 100% good and they always do the right thing, unless there's somebody Columbo always does the right thing. He never lets anybody off. Or Miss Marple always does the right thing and never lets anybody off. But unless they're really interesting in a different way, it's not so interesting to have this hero where they don't have tough moral choices to make. And you're there with them, wondering if it's the right choices or not. That's great stuff. That's really, really fun stuff. When you're on that emotional journey with them, just wondering if it's the right thing to do or not.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit further about a couple of things, about the clan, the big clan on the island.
Yep.
And also, we haven't talked about the Aboriginal people in the book and the situation there on the island. There's a little bit of backstory. This isn't really a spoiler, folks. It's pretty early on. But you talk about how in the book this clan kicked the Aboriginal people off the island.
Yeah.
And that therefore the island was, I think, a place without dreaming.
It's a place without a dreaming.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really pungent idea. I mean, I love Australia, and I love Australian novelists and Australian writers. I can normally, but it is odd sometimes when they talk about this landscape, and it's as if the landscape has only existed for about 100 years.
You mean since the first
Yeah,
convicts
since
arrived?
the first white people came there, and it hasn't. It's existed for tens of thousands
Actually,
of years.
it's the oldest continuing civilization in
Yeah.
the world. Longer than China. The
Yeah.
indigenous people of Australia have.
Yeah, and it's this really, really deep, rich culture, and incredibly interesting and incredibly, and you know, I years before I ever went to Australia, I remember reading. You guys all probably read it as well. Bruce Chatwin's The Songlines, and he went out there and he just lived among the Aboriginal people for a long time, and then he kind of was trying to explain their worldview, and their worldview is so interesting. They think that the world they live in is just rich with deep meaning, and there's deep meaning in all the landscape, and as they go through the landscape, the meaning is revealed onto them, and then they become part of the landscape itself, and it's an incredibly beautiful, interesting way of living. And the people on the island have no sense of that at all. And for them, it's this harsh, horrible place that they're stuck in, and for them, there's no beauty or texture to it at all. And I kind of like that idea that there's, you know, there's two ways of looking at this world, and there's a richer, deeper way of
You
seeing
can
it.
really see it in Aboriginal art. When we went to Bouchertown in Vancouver, I don't think you went. There's an amazing museum in Vancouver of what do I want to call it? Native. I can't remember. Anyway, it's just a brilliant museum, and they had, when we were there, an entire exhibition, a whole wing of Australian Aboriginal art, and it's remarkable the way they portray the world.
Yeah.
And you know the colors they use and the patterns that they use, and I have to say that they're making a strong showing.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
after and we see that. I was just in the French Polynesia, which is a French colony, still a French colony, and the main language is French, which is why you would go there instead of Hawaii if you want to be French. Also, there's about 1% of the tourists that go to Hawaii. But anyway, they are just now letting Tahitian be taught again in school.
Yeah.
They are just now respecting, you know, the culture of the islands. You know, if you go to Scotland and Ireland, they're bringing back
Well, I mean, that's the thing.
all of that. And so that attempt to make everything like Western Europe is now reverting back to some of these original cultures.
Because people realize that the richness there is in those worlds, and how it doesn't all have to be you know, monolingual. There's all this sort of depth and complexity. And in the British Isles, it's so interesting. You know, Welsh was
Irish.
almost dying out. Irish was almost dying out. Scots Erse, as they call it, was almost dying out. And in France too, there's been an attempt to bring back Breton
and then the one in the south, the
Aquitaine.
Yeah, the Aquitaine. I'm trying to remember. There's a better word for it, but anyway,
Yeah, that sort of Languedoc type dialect.
Actually, Languedoc means language of the Occitan.
Yes, of the Occitan people, and then over on a slightly on the different coast, of course, there's the Catalan. And Basque influences, but anyway, yes, that richness of place. We in Ireland, there's a lot of that too. I mean, one of the reasons I loved doing the Sean Duffy books was because I loved talking about the landscape and how deep and dense and rich was the atmosphere the landscape was there. I mean, it's like nowhere else on Earth. When you go to Australia, when you drive 9 hours north out of Melbourne and you're in this empty desert and you see the Milky Way above your head like you've never seen it anywhere else on Earth, you just know you're in this incredible place, you know.
Well, you can leave Belfast and drive up to the Giant's Causeway, and if you skip
Yeah,
all
but
the
it's always-
tourist crap, you know, but it would give you the same kind of idea.
Yeah, well,
People just-
you know, funnily enough, my daughter, before I came here, we hadn't left the house in about 2.5 years, or maybe about 2 years. My daughter was really missing her grandmother, and so just last week or a week and a half ago, we flew to Belfast, and it was our first time on a plane, and we flew to, my brother met us at the airport, and we took my daughter around all these places that she'd, I think, visited before, but didn't remember, because she's quite young. And so we took her to the Giant's Causeway, and we took her to, and she loved it.
I think it's stupendous. It's just that you have to discount, you know, the touristy stuff that's all around it, and just.
We have to do that with everywhere, though.
To the rocks, right?
Yeah.
And Patrick, you had another question, which we've lost here.
We got derailed. Where was I going?
digressed.
Where was I going with
I don't
that?
know. You said
No,
you had two things.
Well, there's the parallel, of course, between, you know, the situation in Australia with the Aboriginal people and the American Indian.
Yeah.
And there's that. Did you ever see the movie The Proposition? With Nick Cave did the score. It's kind of like a Blood Meridian set in.
Oh,
Australia.
wait, I did see that.
Excellent.
Yeah, I did see that movie.
Another digression, but
Yes.
That's what these are all about, Patrick.
Yes.
Digression.
but circling back to the
I
clan.
watched it because of the soundtrack.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Circling back to the family, there's some Celtic origin among them. Is that
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And also, it reminded me a little bit of kind of Southern Gothic Australia.
Yeah.
A little bit of Daniel Woodrell thrown in there
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
in the family.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot
Yeah.
of Daniel Woodrow
I'm
in
a
it.
huge
Yeah.
fan of Dan Woodrell, and I love those worlds.
I also want to know before I'll interrupt you, sorry, but in the back there's that really great afterword, and you talk about how James Ellroy and Salman Rushdie both had an idea that made their way into this book.
Yeah. Because I pitched them the story. They said, well, around lockdown, I was not writing, but I was doing interviews with various writers, and both of them said to me, I didn't offer it, but they said, what are you working on? And I said, I'm not working on anything, but I've just had a conversation with my agent. I've got this idea for a book, and they said, what's the idea? So I pitched them, you know, just basically what I pitched you guys. And Rushdie had an idea, and he said, Rushdie's idea was, you know, obvious, but when you think about it, he says, establish early on that there's no way off the island, because the readers are going to be thinking, oh, they can just swim for it, or they can make a boat, or something like that.
It's pretty sharky out there.
And it hadn't occurred to me. But in real life, I remember when we took that ferry over, we saw a great white shark. And I hadn't put that in, but I thought, of course,
Right.
show the shark, and then the reader will know, oh my God, they're not swimming for it. And then Elroy's idea, I was talking to Elroy about it, and he said, you know, you're going to get, if you do that idea, there's going to be lots of points in the book where, you know, they're recovering or getting for breath or whatever. Like that. He says, try and make those as few and far between as possible. He says, try and keep them, because this could be a very static story of them hiding out on the island. He says, try and keep a momentum going. And I thought about that, and I thought, yeah, absolutely. It can be one long chase, like Mad Max Fury Road or something like that. It can basically just be one long, it can be one long chase. Yeah. And there are a few moments where they recover and they talk. I mean, there has to be. But for a lot of it, it could have been called The Chase, because a lot of it is a long chase where they're hiding, they're running, they're trying to survive. And actually, you know, it's funny you say that, because I was thinking about the models of the book. Deliverance was obviously a huge model. But also from the 70s, I remember First Blood is a model. because that also starts in a weird way. Deliverance and First Blood also start with a way where nothing really should have happened, because Deliverance kind of starts with a faux pas, and then it all escalates, and it could have gone another way where they just had a nice canoe trip. And First Blood also starts off where he goes to this town and they escort him out, and he could have just left, and it would have just been fine, but he doesn't just leave, and it all escalates in terrible ways. And so I wanted that moment in the island where they want to get the ferry over to the island, but then the guy charges them. He says, "Oh yeah, you've got to pay." And as sensible people, they should have said, "We're not paying."
You almost said something else, but that's okay.
What was I going to say?
We're not fucking paying.
Yeah. We're not doing that.
I saw the word form.
Yeah. And it says so they all have this moment of trespass in Deliverance, in First Blood.
Actually, there are a couple of Reachers like that.
Yeah.
Where Reacher could have.
There's a
turned
moment
around.
of trespass, and people make the choices.
Yeah.
And so those were definitely too big. And then another 70s model for me was in the UK and Ireland, we had this thing called the video nasty, and it was basically movies which were so horrific they couldn't even be rated. So there was the X rating was the worst rating you could get, and then the rating board in the UK would look at these movies and say, "Oh no one's allowed to see these movies." So they went straight to video, and they were called video nasties. And they're the movies everybody wanted to see. Like kids my age said, "Oh my God, I don't want to see an X-rated movie. I want to see this unrated video nasty." So they were movies like, Texas Chainsaw, Last House on the Left, I Spit in Your Grave, all those kind of like exploitation 70s movies,
Roger Corman.
Yeah, a lot of those as well. But particularly I Spit in Your Grave had a huge influence on me because it's so visceral and horrific and clunkily filmed. It feels like a home movie.
I remember seeing the VHS cover of that.
Yeah, it's horrific. It's a really horrific.
Terrible title too.
Yeah.
Oh.
But the title totally makes sense in the context of the story. And I Spit in Your Grave definitely came into this book, because it's I Spit in Your Grave. The story is of it's also you never want to take a cabin in the woods to do any writing, because the story of a really sophisticated Manhattan writer who takes a cabin upstate to get some writing done, and terrible things happen, and you go, "Oh my God, I'll never do that." So that was definitely an influence. So it's just a lot of 70s type influences in the story.
I'm paying attention, guys. I'm actually looking at some of your comments on Facebook, and so there's some good questions. And there's Craig. Gotta love Craig. He says, "Is crime fiction still the new punk?" Adrian wrote that in The Guardian a few years back.
Yeah.
Still true.
I think crime. Well, it probably isn't anymore because it's become so popular.
You got Petra the Punk. I love that.
Yeah. It's become crime fiction now. I think in the UK outsells every other genre. So it used to be this genre for outsiders, especially working class writers in Britain. You could never get published in literary fiction when I was growing up, because literary fiction was for posh people who lived in North London. So where did you go? People like David Peace, well, they wrote crime fiction because anybody could be published in crime fiction, and the sleazier and dirtier, the better. So I don't think it is anymore because it's become establishment, and once you become establishment, you're not punk anymore.
It's also become. Originally, crime fiction was basically British and American, but now it's really worldwide. The Japanese have their own, and translation is becoming much more common. And so crime fiction, I think, has changed.
Japanese crime fiction is incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And it's amazing stuff.
It's amazing.
And some of it's very classical, like a Christie structure, but, different. And there's Indian crime, whatever. And so I think that it's become a much, a global kind of literature that it wasn't back when you're talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's a Japanese writer, just to go off on another tangent, called Soji Shimada. and he basically writes locked room mysteries.
Mhm.
It's like old style 1930s
Yep.
locked room mysteries, and that's his specialty.
And they're wonderful.
And they're great. They're so great. So yes, it's no longer punk because it's become the establishment.
Right. Let's see here.
You can disagree with that, Patrick, if you.
What's that?
You can disagree with that if you.
Well, no, I don't. I think at its best, like.
Yeah.
But then it's mostly I think of people from the past, like Derek Raymond.
Oh yeah.
Much more punk rock than him. But there are a lot of good ones.
There's a David Peace novel, and I'm actually not gonna.
Is it one of the Tokyo ones?
No, one of the Red Riding Quartet.
Oh, okay.
And the first 3 pages, maybe it's the third one, 1980.
There's
And
74, 77,
80, and 83.
83, yeah.
And it's the first 3 pages of 1980 are among the most shocking things I've ever read in my life in terms of language and depravity and
Notice he's relishing it.
that is
right?
that is definitely
There's
punk.
enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And whenever I read it, I remember thinking, how did this get published? And this was me thinking that, and I was just so I can't imagine what was going on in the publishing house.
Were you slightly envious?
I was totally envious because there's I'm actually not going to say it here, but it says in massive. You probably remember this, Patrick. It says Part 1, and then it's Saint something, and it's a massive bold text, and I go, how did he get away with that? That's incredible. And then the next page is worse. And then it's really, and so that is definitely something.
Those Tokyo Year Zero and Occupied City. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And then somebody's making the comment, yes, but who can write like David Peace? He's a standalone. Yes,
Yeah,
he is.
it's true.
There's no one like him. Yeah, we digress again.
And he's
Huh?
a hard sell, too.
He is tough. Yeah, I mean, that new book, we were just talking about that it was
We both
very dense.
we both reviewed his new novel for different
Yeah.
publications.
Yeah.
It was a tough read.
Let's open it up to you guys.
Anybody have a question?
Will we see Sean Duffy again?
Absolutely.
There you go.
Absolutely. I've got 3 more ideas, one of which I've completely written. It's completely done. Just needs to be edited and copy edited. The second book, I think I have a pretty strong, because they're all chronological.
Right.
So I have a pretty strong idea for an event that Duffy would be involved in. And the third book is more nebulous, but I do know that I want to bring him up to the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement in 1988. And it's got to be something in there. And I think that will be a great arc.
Do you have some Tom Waits titles?
Oh yeah,
that's
the problem. I've got titles for about 40 because there's so many great Tom Waits lines that absolutely I could do Tom Waits titles until the cows come home. In fact, I was just last night at Mysterious Books. Someone said to me, I picked up your book, Police at the Station, and They Don't Look Friendly, because it was the most cumbersome title they'd ever seen on the cover of a book. And they thought, who the hell would write a title like that? And I thought, they've fallen right into my trap. Yeah, my trap worked perfectly. Just put the most awkward. And if you look at that book on Amazon, it's even more awkward because it's the Amazon title it Police at the Station and They Don't Look Friendly, a Sean Duffy thriller, second colon, Sean Duffy number 6. And so it's a 20-word title. And I'm just going, beat that.
Continue on the other side.
Yeah, beat that.
I'm trying to count my favorite.
Yeah,
James.
well,
no, come on, James Lee Burke. I thought had.
Oh yeah, and he's done a lot
In
of
the Electric Mist with the Confederate,
Confederate Dead
was always my favorite long title, but maybe you beat him on that.
Oh, I definitely beat him in terms of length.
Colons.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Stefania, her friend from Italy, she's been tuning in.
She is a night owl.
I know, it's like
Good
4
for
in the
you,
morning.
Stefania. I mean, you must go to bed at dawn and then sleep all day.
Yeah, I asked her, what time is it over there? It's like 4 in the morning. She wants to know, is it true that a writer has to write for his or her own pleasure? Also, do you fear your readers' opinions about your work?
I sometimes I do write for my pleasure, but sometimes you just have to grind out a chapter. Like if there's a chapter that you just have to get to a certain place, you just grind it out. You just grind out what you know is going to happen, and sometimes it's not that fun. Like, for instance, when I finished The Chain, and I'd done a couple of drafts, and then it went to an editor, and then it went to a copy editor, and it went to a proofreader, and I had to read all those versions of it, and I had to read all my versions as well. So by the time that book was done, I'd read that book complete about 8 or 9 times. And so then they called me up and said, Adrian, would you be interested in writing the screenplay of The Chain? And I said, hell no. I never want to go near that material ever again, because it's really just emotionally wrenching. Yeah. I really do not want to go back into that world, and especially go back into that world and start parsing it apart again, and think. So I said absolutely not, because it was just too painful to ever do that
Speaking of The Chain and film, what's going on?
I'm not allowed to say, but someone else has written a screenplay, which I was forced to read, and surprisingly enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
Like the experience. I thought, oh my God, do I really have to read this? And they said, yes, you do. And then when I read it, I thought, oh, thank God, because it's not my voice, it's someone else's voice, and someone else is looking at this material, which it was like a bit like being dead, and people talking about you, at your wake. And I thought, well, that's so interesting that how they saw this happening. I quite like that experience.
What's going on with the island? Because I thought I noticed there was a Hulu thing going on.
Hulu have optioned it, and they want to do a limited series of the island, which is also very exciting. I doubt very much they'll film it on the real island, because I can't imagine them getting there and just go, wait, there's no phone service, there's no running water. Where are we gonna park these the trailers? So it would be so cool if they filmed it. If they do make a script and it does get green lighted, and they actually camp to Australia and film it on the island itself, I'll be so happy, because that would be so awesome. Because it's such a weird, strange, cool, interesting place.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Christina's Estes. This is going to open up a can of worms.
Go.
Can you share some of your favorite 70s songs and/or musicians?
Well, I'm going to plug a group of musicians that I was shocked earlier on tonight that no one had heard of. I'm not looking at anyone in particular in the audience, but the Undertones. I almost wore my Undertones T-shirt tonight. And if you're into punk, and you probably know the Clash, you probably know the Sex Pistols, you probably know the Damned, you probably know
Stiff Little Fingers.
Stiff Little Fingers.
That's Belfast.
Yeah. But the Undertones are a band from Derry, Northern Ireland. They had maybe 3 or 4 hits, but I think their work is pretty consistent. They've got up. So I'm going to plug the Undertones, because I think they're good. They reformed without their lead singer a few years ago. And they're still touring, and they're still great, and they still bring it. So definitely I think the Undertones. Let's plug those guys.
All right.
They do good work.
Zara, I think I have that name right, said, all right, before we go, of everything, all your work, I love Falling Glass.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's the I got to say something as an aside. That's the book I get the most hate mail about. I get hate mail, and the publishers forward it to me, which
That's really thoughtful.
I wish they wouldn't, but they feel obliged to send me the letters, and they don't know what's in them. But some of it is hate mail, and that's the book I get the most hate mail about because of the ending. And spoilers, I'm not going to tell the actual ending, but I'm going to tell you why people hate the ending so much. Because in Falling Glass, I take a character from a different series called Michael Forsyth, and I make him a side character in this other character, Killian, who's in Falling Glass, who's who's a side character in the Duffy novels and a side character in Michael Forsyth's story. And he, like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, becomes the lead in Falling Glass, and everyone else is the side character in his world. And so I bring these two worlds together, Killian's world and Michael Forsyth's world, and you know that they're both on a collision course because they've chosen different paths. And I get to the end of the book, and these two men go into your room, and they're in actually a caravan, and only one of them can come out of the room. And to much of my readers' hatred, I don't tell you which one comes out of the room.
Unresolved ending.
It's an unresolved ending, and my God, people don't mind happy endings. They don't mind sad endings, but they hate the unresolved ending.
But you know what? There was a book last year that I thought it was sent to me to read before it published. And I thought the book would only work with an unresolved ending, and I was overruled. And I still believe that it would have been better. The book, I'm not saying, but I think that the book actually would have been better if they had stuck with it.
I love it.
You didn't need to know.
Yeah, no.
The final thing.
You decide for yourself.
Exactly. And that's Gone with the Wind. I mean, come on, it's one of the most famous lines in American commercial fiction. I'll think about that tomorrow. You know, okay. You know, that's the unresolved ending.
Yeah.
She goes back to Tara, and you have to decide for yourself. It's participatory for the reader. That's why I like that.
And it's also fun for me because I grew up with those roll your own adventure books.
Yeah.
Where it was a book, but you could go and make your own adventure, and no two adventures were the same. And so as a reader, you decide. But a lot of people don't like that. And
Did you say roll your own adventure?
Yeah.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, what do they have over
Well,
there?
and we had sometimes there was these ones where like a cross between D&D and novels.
Really?
And then you'd bring your die 8 or your 20-sided dice, and then you could decide, or you could let the dice decide.
Craig just came in with the Undertones album, Teenage Kicks.
Oh my God, Teenage
Knows
Kicks.
his stuff.
Yeah, it's great stuff. The only song, I don't know if you guys know John Peel, was a famous British DJ. The only song he ever played twice in a row was Teenage Kicks on his cult late night show. And
Based on the Avengers character, the DJ? Did he pick his
no, he was there. He was there before the Avengers character.
Some of those Peel sessions are great.
Oh yeah, they're great. They're really good.
Yeah. Anybody else have questions? We could just nerd out on 70s music.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will later.
Go ahead.
Sure.
How much do you struggle with crafting a sentence as opposed to crafting your thought? Does your chase of language, or at least what you're trying to do with language, interfere with your storytelling?
Oh yeah.
Do you compromise it? Do you plow through? What do you do?
Sometimes it's a complete nightmare. Sometimes it's an absolute nightmare. The first Sean Duffy novel, I remember that first page of that first book, The Cold, Cold Ground, I remember taking me weeks because I wanted it to be perfect, and it wasn't. And so I kept coming back and eliminating words and lines and ideas, and I never got it exactly the way I wanted it. In fact, when I read that book, I leave out a couple of things that I feel I should have cut. But my God, the struggle because I really wanted, in that first paragraph of the first Sean Duffy novel, I wanted to establish Belfast, 1981, hunger strikes, riots, rain, all in that first 8 lines. So those lines were so important to me, and that first page was so important to me. And so yeah, really, really hard graft, and go back the next day and strike it out and do it again. And not everybody writers like that. I mean, I've talked to many writers, and they just say, no, you do your 600 words a day, and then next day you do another 600 words, and after 4 or 5 months you've got a novel, and that's your book. And that's never really been my way. I've always seen books as sacred and holy. And if you're going to make this artifact called a book, you better have struggled and done your best work and put it all into the book. And if the book fails, if it doesn't connect with readers or it gets bad reviews, none of that matters. That doesn't matter, because you know that you've put your soul and your craft and the best that you can do into that novel. So nothing can hurt you after that, because once you've given it your all, then whatever happens after that, it doesn't matter, because you've completed that pact with the ether, with the nothingness. You've reached up into the great void, and you've pulled this story that never existed before, and you've put it through your brain and through your fingers into the keyboard and into this thing called a book. And there you go. That was your mission. You fought against entropy and the nothingness and the void, and you gave the world this story, and that's your job done. And if people like it, great. If people don't like it, that's fine. If people hate it, that's also fine. And but you've fulfilled your mission,
and if they make a bad movie, you still have the book.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is something, it's important to remember.
I saw Tom Robbins interview back when I was in college, early 90s, late 80s, one page a day.
Right.
There's some 300-400 page novels.
Right.
One page a day, a lot of mushrooms.
Yeah.
Also said, but crafting that language and not getting there, but not sacrificing the language. Right.
I mean, it's like, there's writers who only ever wrote one book. But when you read the book, so like Invisible Man, it's just one book, Ralph Ellison. But you understand why, because it's so dense and it's so deep and it's so rich and it's so textured. In many ways, Joseph Heller only ever wrote one book. In fact, he wrote like 6 novels, but really everything.
Catch-22?
Yeah, but everything went into Catch-22, and it was just that was all of him in there, and I completely respect that. If you Patrick or Barbara, who was the Italian author who wrote The Leopard?
Lampedusa.
So he spent his entire So he spent his entire life writing that book and died before. I think it had been accepted by a publishing house, but did not come out in his.
Yeah, but who's the guy?
John Kennedy O'Toole.
Thank you.
John Kennedy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. One book, and his mom found the manuscript.
Is that a Confederacy of Dunson?
Yeah.
Do you know that?
Shopped it to like Columbia.
That is one of the truly great book collecting stories. Do you know this?
No, tell us that story.
It's fabulous. So there was some guy, I don't remember who he was, maybe Patrick remembers. Anyway, he was making a splash in the book collecting world because he had these astonishing signatures, and everybody wondered how it was. He was contacting some of these remarkable people and he was making a fortune, and people were so excited and they were buying these books. And then one day he offered an autographed copy of the Confederacy of Dunces. A posthumous publication.
Yeah.
And the whole house of cards came tumbling down.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I think he might have included that.
I think you're right.
In one of John Dunning's books, because he was so great at that. But To Kill a Mockingbird.
Exactly.
I think actually, Adrian, sometimes a stunning success it can be paralytic.
Yeah.
That the author so fears never being able to equal again.
True. That also might have been Ralph Ellison and Harper Lee's issue.
And we won't know about Margaret Mitchell because she died, but Gone with the Wind, we'll never know if there was another one. So we can't. Danny, do you have a final question? Is there one from the audience?
I kind of did.
Oh, I'm sorry,
You
Merle.
mentioned movies going off the book for a moment. Did you see last year's movie Belfast?
I did. I saw.
I just want to know what you thought.
Well, it's not really my cup of tea. It's kind of like a sentimental kid story, but I found myself quite enjoying it.
Katrina was great.
Yeah, I found myself quite enjoying it, and there's a really interesting shot about 15 seconds into the movie, and it's of Carrickfergus Castle, and if you freeze the video and look to the right of the castle, you can see my sister's pub.
So a very personal movie.
So my sister's pub is in the movie, and so I'm not going to say anything bad about it.
Oh, that's so
because
funny.
it's a good ad for my. I mean, most of it was filmed on sets and studios in England, but they did some exteriors in and around Belfast. And my sister's pub's in the movie. So.
Before we wrap up, have you read Stuart Neville's latest novel?
I have not. Got
It's terrifying, and it's
really?
It's there's some similar, through lines between your two books in ways.
Stu is great. Stu's really.
Sebastian.
Has he been here?
Yeah.
A couple of times.
Once under his other name and then
Oh
with
yeah.
his real name. So I would like to end up on a more positive note. Adrian and I briefly touched upon a place in Melbourne that I remember very, very clearly. So it's a happy place, and it involves penguins. And many of you may not realize that there are, in fact, little burrowing penguins, and I have been to see them at the bottom of Australia, at the bottom of Africa and South Africa, in Argentina, down in, they're all kind of the same. But describe the venue, and then I'll tell you
my God,
story.
The little fairy penguins. There's this place called Phillips Island, and it's about an hour and a half drive south of Melbourne. And they swim in the sea during the day, and then at night they hop out of they're tiny. They're fairy penguins. They're little guys, and they hop out of the beach, and then they go up the beach into the burrows. And then people realized that they were doing this every night, so they set up these bleachers. And you drive down there at dusk, and then you sit in the bleachers, and then you just wait. And the penguins ignore the people. They're not interested in humans. And you're not allowed to take flash photography because you're not allowed to upset the penguins. But you don't need to do any of that. You just sit there and vibe on the great Southern Ocean, and then you're just watching this blank void of Southern Ocean, and suddenly, bloop, 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 all these little penguins, hundreds of them, come out and then walk past you, like literally walk past you through the bleachers and up into their little burrows behind you.
So what's really going on is these are the parent penguins, and they go out to sea in order to collect food because they have left their little baby penguins back in the nests, and they're established little trails, and it's like salmon going home, to lay. So they have their own little routes, but the tragedy can arise if the parent penguins don't come out of the water for whatever reason. The little ones, chicks, whatever you want to call them, I can't remember, are going to die. They're going to starve because they have no ability to feed themselves. So my husband and I go down to Phillips Island. We're driven down there, and indeed there are the concrete bleachers and the whole bit, and you're facing the Southern Ocean. And just as we sit down, this absolutely horrendous storm comes up, and there's thunder, there's lightning, and the little penguins have started to come out of the water, and there's this lightning bolt and all the rest of it, and they all go like that, literally like that, and they all turn around and go back out to sea except for one little penguin. Now, these are communal penguins. They do not operate individually. They are a group thing. So we're waiting for this little penguin to join the crowd, and I promise you, he turned around and he looked back at all the retreating penguins, and he turned around and he shrugged his little penguin shoulders and he started marching along his allotted path, and he went by us. Yeah. And everyone was completely stunned because they never do that. Right. So, he toddled up. I have a video of him somewhere. He toddled along, the little guy, toddled along up the path, past all the people, never pays any attention, whatever it is, disappears into his burrow. And I thought that was one of the most moving things I had ever seen.
If you're in Australia and you've got like 3 or 4 days, or maybe 2 or 3 days in Melbourne, so definitely must see. It's definitely one of the great things to see. Unless you're a Mad Max lunatic like me.
And then you want to go the other direction.
And then you want to go the other direction and go up into all those Mad Max roads and landscapes. Or if you stay a little longer, you can do both.
Very, very true.
Yes.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you guys
for joining us. It's really been a pleasure. It's always a treat to talk to Adrian. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.